literary terms all the time and you don't really notice it on the way through. And then later on you realise that actually it is more or less distinctive. The house wasn't full of books, but we went down to the library every Thursday and got 2 books out, or there were at least 3 libraries at work. You know, there was the one after school where I read all the books in the children's section before catching my bus home. And then I went to the library with my mother on a Thursday, a different library. And there were also books. And later, there was very territorial stuff about your bookshelf. I was the youngest of 5. And so my elder siblings had different books on their bookshelves. So you weren't allowed to take them. And there was a lot of stealing and borrowing going on. They were quite prized, you know. But I learned to read at the age of 3.
You did? Who taught you?
My mother.
She taught you how to read, because you were a precocious child, I have read.
I was a precocious child. Also, I think because of that youngest thing at the end of 5, the 5th of 5. And so when my elder sister went to school, my mother had me all day, I suppose. It must have been sort of gorgeous. And taught me how to read. And I know this because the neighbours, I mean, nobody believes you, you know. So, least of all my siblings, but somebody rang in a radio show and said, I remember Anne reading on the curb. I used to do performative reading for the neighbours' children. They ran over to get an encyclopedia. I said, what's that word? What's that word? And I would spell it out.
Wow. Okay. And
Yeah.
this was where in Ireland? This was in...
This is in the suburbs of Dublin, in, very ordinary, low-key kind of suburb.
All right. And then, neither parent is writerly, correct? You didn't have a parent who published.
My mother is still regrets not writing. But I never talked about that when she was going to listen to my interviews, but she's so elderly now. I'm released from, I can say... Yeah, she said, I'd love to have been a writer. Or she attempted at some stage, you know, to write little stories. And I sometimes think about it now, how, you know, she had plenty of time in her hands in her 40s and 50s or 50s and 60s, and why she didn't have the confidence or the kind of whatever it just took to get over the threshold and into the world of writing herself.
Did you as a child sense, or was it made explicit to you that she did have this longing to be a writer, or this like latent talent?
She showed me a short story once when she had written, when I haven't told this to anyone, Brad. She showed me, I came home from school and she showed me a little story she had written that she was going to enter for a competition. And being young, I wasn't all that impressed.
Yeah, I mean, the way that our kids don't really care what we do.
What? Yeah, okay, yeah. It's a story, yeah. So I wasn't all that impressed. But I felt she had put considerable kind of thought into it and effort into it.
Do you know, can you recall what the story was about?
I am not ready to talk about that.
Okay.
I'm not ready. Not yet. That's for the memoir, yeah.
Fair enough. So you... I come from a family. I want to say your grandmother was educated and was one of the first Irish women to get a degree, like in that generation, right? Is that
so? That
correct?
was unusual, yeah. And the integration of the women's colleges into UCD, University College Dublin, which was the main sort of university for Catholics. Protestants went to Trinity College, unbelievably. She was happening as she was at college in Dublin, yeah. So she got her degree from UCD. So that was one of the first batches of women to be conferred through that process. I don't know what she studied or anything. I think she was going to become a teacher. She had languages, and she was I think at that stage even she was an orphan. She had some money as an inheritance. So that strand of the family had a little kind of going concern up near Dundalk in Ireland, a kind of inn, you might call it. And so there was money. I mean, compared to a lot of the population at the time. So and they all became sort of priests, that family, and the man she married he didn't promptly die, but he died pretty quick. And they all became priests as well. So those are the very arcane sort of details.
Okay. But did you know this grandmother? Like, was she a part of your childhood or no?
No, I think I think she plays a part in my earliest memory, which was very young. And I think what I remember is her reading in a corner, in a chair, in a particular house. So, but other than that very fragmentary little kind of thing, I have no memory of her. She died when I was 6, so maybe I should have done.
Well, I mean, I can't remember anything. I always complain on this show about how bad my memory is.
But what is that? I don't know. I remember a lot, and I don't know.
But
yeah, I mean, I remember being 3.
Do you really?
Well, I remember that moment in the road with people, the reading moment. Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, I guess like the sticky stuff sticks, but I just am not like, my wife can be like, oh yeah, I remember that day in like junior high when I wore that sweater, and I'm just like, what?
Oh, some of it is kind of, for some people, they tie it in with the clothes.
Yeah.
It's a really good trick.
I do remember what I wore on the first day of 6th grade because it involved suspenders. I wore suspenders that were yellow. It was ill-advised.
Bonus.
So, anyway, you are growing up in Dublin, and during high school, you went off to what you have characterized in past interviews as a peculiar school in Canada.
It was kind of odd, yeah.
All right, but I'm curious about this because I never got the name of it. I'm like, what was this place? Was it like an arts school or was it some sort of boarding school?
It wasn't a cult, okay? When I say peculiar, it wasn't a cult. I was finishing school at 16 and I was supposed to go and au pair somewhere and look after some German family's child, which was a great escape for both the German child and for me at the age of 16. And improve my German. That was one of the things we did in our family. We went off to improve our languages by looking after children. So, there's a scholarship opportunity. Now, my mother was addicted to scholarships, so she signed the paper. She didn't really realise that it would mean I would leave at the age of 16 to 18 and go to Canada to a place called Pearson College, an international United World College of the Pacific. So, you hear about the United World College of the Atlantic now these days because all the kind of Belgian princesses are going there, or the Danish royal families sent their children there. In the days when I was going to the United World Colleges, it was completely scholarship based. There were no fees, and there were 200 students from 50 different countries in a corner of Vancouver Island called Pedder Bay, and we were all supposed to go yomping across the countryside in an outward bound sort of way.
Right.
There were a lot of Canadians. There were 50 Canadians. And there was a bit of what I would now call yodelay-hee-hoo. He went out in the woods and he went up the mountains and whatever. So I didn't do any of that. I stayed strictly inside and smoked.
As one does.
Class and yes, exactly. Yeah.
All right. So you finished school at 16. Is that early in Ireland?
It is early, yeah. It was early. But that's, I don't know, yeah.
So how did you do it? Like, you just skip grades or something?
Oh, I started young and then I had to switch schools, and they decided they hadn't enough desks in the class and I had to go up some classes.
Okay. And so
that was what they told me. They didn't tell me that I could read and write and all the rest of it, which was, that they wanted to give me a bit, I don't know.
Yeah, you needed a bit more of a challenge. You were advanced.
Maybe so.
Okay. So you study English and philosophy at university at Trinity.
I came back to Trinity and went into English and philosophy, which was basically, the idea was you will never get a job with this degree. So that was my intention in life. The
Sounds
German
great.
at this stage, no German, the philosophy, completely useless. And then I spent 4 years in the theatre, not even in the English and philosophy departments.
Okay, but let me ask, in retrospect, with the benefit of hindsight, obviously the degree in English has served you well as a writer, but has the degree in philosophy served your fiction in ways that you can ascertain?
Well, I did the International Baccalaureate in Canada, and I was studying the existentialists, and it was all very exciting. And then you come to Ireland and you're studying Locke, Berkeley and Hume. It was really, really dull. And the philosophy department 40 years ago was not interested in teaching. It was all, they drifted around in a state of abstraction. Students were kind of surprised if they walked in the door and they said, "Oh, is that the time?" Sort of. That was the approach. They were doing philosophy of language and all kinds of things. I did 2 courses that were really useful. No, one, I did a course in psychoanalysis in year 3 or something. So I read all my Freud then. I read Freud at that stage, and that was interesting. And that was useful, and that did feed into it, I suppose, yeah.
But you said that you were involved in the theater department.
Yeah, we were just having a ball. I mean, we were just having the best time. There was it's not a theatre department, there was a little student-run theatre in the front square of Trinity College. And we put on plays every single week, and we lived there and, lived and loved and fought and fell out and did the whole thing. We were just had the best ever time.
And you were writing plays?
I did, actually.
Were you performing?
Well, my children were asking me, yes, I have some plays in my deep, deep past. I'm not digging them out anytime soon. Yes, the monologue was one of my forms. Yeah, and I acted. Yes, I did, and did the lights. I was good at doing lights, and operated the lights. And I didn't actually build sets. That was another kind of. That was the lads did that. They'd stay up all night building the sets. It was really amazing.
That sounds
so
great.
Much fun.
And the performing thing was something you took to?
Well, out of that group of people, I've been extremely fortunate when I think back, because there were kind of good sort of enclaves of activity and excitement, good groups. So one good group was that gang in college. They set up a theatre company called Rough Magic Theatre Company. And that's still going today. And it's very hard to kind of conjure those days, because there was no employment in Ireland at the time. So everybody who went to college emigrated, every single person, except the fools who were doing theatre and cultural things where you weren't going to make any money anyway. So they are the people who stayed. So the engineers and they all went, and we hung out putting on shows. So Rough Magic were slightly ahead of me, so I did a couple of shows with them, yeah. I did a wonderful Carol Churchill play called Top Girls, and a Wallace Shawn play called Aunt Dan and Lemon, which is a very American, a lovely play. Wallace Shawn is so nice to do, yeah.
Okay, yeah. I saw him once at a dry cleaners, as one does in Los Angeles.
Okay. I read a Ulysses with him many years later. I couldn't believe what my life had done.
The whole thing?
No, it was the Calypso chapter from Ulysses, and he played Bloom for some kind of radio thing in New York.
Wow.
It's like, you're such a part of my life, you don't know this.
That's exciting.
It was fun.
So then graduate school. And
MA, yes.
And studying with Angela Carter, who is a influential mentor of yours.
I took a year out. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was kind of half acting, half not acting. I mean, even in those days, I kind of ran the stats a bit and realised that 9-to-1 roles were male, and that I would only ever play the little sister or the waitress. I got offered some maid parts, Excuse me, sir. There's a vampire at the door, wants to talk to you. So, the Irish maid. I was never going to be whatever. I don't know, whatever. I was never going to be head of cobbler. So, that took me a while to figure out. I applied for a scholarship, keyword, to the University of East Anglia, and they gave me about £10 a month more than the dole, the welfare in Ireland. So I took it.
And you go there, and Angela Carter is one of your teachers.
She was in the spring term, yeah. So Angela Carter, I had read I was there in 1986, but 67. I had read the books as they came out. It was so exciting, and so recognisable, and so of the time. They were so intuitively right. The Bloody Chamber and Nights at the Circus. They were just spot on in the timing in the culture and in my life, I think. So I kind of arrived in Angela Carter's room in the spring term, and like, I'm here, here I am, yes. It's like as though she knew me as well as I already kind of thought I knew her. Or in those days, because there was no internet, you went into a shop and you identified you're a writer. And that was a very kind of, I was going to say arrogant, but it's very kind of modest, actually. Funny, I'm not getting that right. You know what I mean? You just go in and you say, that's it, there it is. Mine,
Yeah.
And there's no one to tell you otherwise in those days. It was one-to-one, the book and the reader.
You have said in the past regarding Angela Carter and that educational experience that she was, quote, wonderfully vague and terribly impressive. She was very friendly, but she had nothing really to say about my work.
No. I wrote a sort of fake Angela Carter thing and put it into her. It was about a Japanese dance form. That was very Angela Carter. And it was on the desk, and she was sitting in front of the desk, and she said, she waved. She was quite an elegant woman, and she kind of indicated with her very fine hand, and she said, oh, this is all fine, she said. And then she said, what are you going to do with your life? Sort of thing.
And what did you say?
I said, later I said, I'm going back home to Dublin. And in those days, for people who published through London, Dublin was Hicksville. I mean, utterly, utterly the back of beyond. And also it was not just provincial, but it was repressed. It was awful. It was all, in their heads, But possibly interesting in what came out of it. But at that stage, not yet, So she said, why? Why would you do that? And I said, there's a man. And there's a man. And she said, oh, okay. She let me go home.
And from there, you go on to work in television. So your route to fiction as a professional writer of books was a little bit circuitous. It wasn't like a direct line straight out of graduate school to publishing novels. It was...
Yeah, well, okay, in those days, which is 1986, it is quite a long time ago, there were 2 creative writing courses in the UK. There were none in Ireland, and nobody went to grad school to be a writer and then became a writer kind of straight off. That was a novel. It was a completely new path. It wasn't a career choice. Writing was not a career. It was vocational, or you just didn't... I don't know. These days it's very professional, very networked. People are very sussed and clued in, and they know what's what. But that wasn't available in those days. You didn't decide to be a writer. Although I did. I mean, I'm contradicting myself. I wanted to be a writer, and I got a job by accident in television. And given all my precocities, which didn't make me happy, I want to stress, just in case, Anyway, you think, oh, that must have been all wonderful, but it didn't bring the kind of joy you might expect. And so I got a good job in TV. So I had to take this good job in TV, which I stayed there for 6 years.
A good job doing what?
I was a producer and director in TV, which is, and I was a child. I was in my 20s. So I was one of those more commonly known kind of creative throwaway, you like use them for 2 years or so. A young creative, I think they became known as. Work
long hours, maybe don't get paid a ton.
Weeks. You get paid. No, actually in those days you got paid, but the contracts were short. So the money was very good, although I wasn't interested in the money and I didn't know what to buy with the money.
That's good. You saved it. Maybe you put some away for the future.
I did save it almost by accident, and that got me a deposit on an apartment later on. So, But I do remember saying, I don't know what am I supposed to buy? And someone saying, well, try some clothes. That might be, but make yourself look decent. That would be a start, said someone who subsequently became quite famous. And I'm not going to tell you who.
Oh.
So, yeah.
Any
there
hints?
You go.
An actor?
No, famous in Ireland, no.
Okay. And so what were you directing and producing? What kind of television?
So we were going from boring old fogey telly to exciting young quick cut telly, handheld cameras. These were all new. We were getting out of the studio and into VT, and it was all on Betamax. So we had these more portable cameras, and I was part of that kind of inclination in the station in RTE in Ireland. So I did a program called Nighthawks, based on the Edward Hopper title of the painting, which was a late night show set in a cafe, very chaotic, and we fed in, there was a television in the corner, and we fed in satirical sketches and all kinds of strange stuff. So I did a lot of strange stuff, and I was quite usefully strange, I had lots of ideas,
That's always nice when you can be usefully strange. And I have to believe too that there's a line between the fun that you were having at university at Trinity in this theater department and the work that you did in television. That must have served you well.
Absolutely. It was almost natural, and I had a contacts list of actors and young professionals as well. So yeah, and we made things that were all, it was, in those days, everything was 3 minutes, which was a new timing. 3 minutes.
3 minutes?
3.5. 3.5, maybe.
Just what, like little sketches, little things?
An interview would go on maybe for 5, and then you'd have a sketch for 3, yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. And you said, I'm going to quote you back to yourself about this experience. You said in RTE, which is the name of what does that stand for?
It stands for Radio Telefís Éireann. It's in Irish.
Okay. So in RTE, I thought I had learned all I needed to know about human ambition and its essential silliness. It's interesting to see how institutions work. It's interesting to see how authority is claimed or denied. It's interesting to see how paranoia accumulates.
Oh, yeah. That was unexpectedly wise of me back in the day.
I was going to say. But can you elaborate a little bit? What is it you learned? I mean, I get the human ambition in film and television. I mean, I live in Los Angeles.
TV is fundamentally, I don't know if it is fundamentally stupid, okay? So, but TV, you might have a great ambition to produce a really crap quiz show that does very well. Yeah?
Yeah.
So that's your cutthroat ambition, is to make a stupid quiz show that does really well.
Yeah. Isn't that odd?
Very strange.
And it was not something that I take it you were interested in all that much.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether I certainly did. I was very young, and I don't think I knew I didn't have a professional attitude. I was I had lots of ideas, and I ran around the place filming and making them and all the rest of it. I had no management kind of ideas of upper management, and I was still very bad at being told what to do, and not really brilliant at telling other people what to do either. I was a bit of a lone operator, maybe.
But probably very useful creatively, I
was creatively. No, I do admit to that usefulness, yes.
And what about paranoia? Was this the kind of paranoia that happened? I mean, the way that I made sense of it is thinking of past office environments that I've been in that become kind of consuming in terms of their internal politics and people trying to advance their own agendas or keep their jobs or take somebody else's job. I mean, that sort of stuff is just part of the work life, it seems.
Yeah, and unusually, I think in telecommunications in Ireland at the time, we were put there to do a kind of interesting, lively show, but the people who ran the station really disliked the fact they couldn't control it. So there were political scandals even that came out of the show. that caused the higher management in RTE great difficulty. So you'll be wondering why you're always editing on the weekends, you know. So why
Yeah.
couldn't you get, why was your schedule just the worst? And it was this slow grinding down of the people that they didn't wish to advance because you were going to be trouble. I mean, that was just, I think, true.
So it was during this time that you were, correct me if I'm wrong, beginning to work on your debut novel, The Wig My Father Wore.
Which is set in TV. I mean, the first thing I did was I used to go home and work on short stories at the weekend. I'd spend the weekend writing short stories because they were somehow graspable within that time frame. I could go back the next weekend and they'd still be somehow manageable. I think a novel needs more time, more time. But yeah, so I left RTE and I started writing afterwards, The Wig My Father Wore, which is, one of those titles.
So you left the TV job, you had some savings, and did that sustain you through the writing of that debut?
No, we were poor as church mice. We were really poor. I mean, we had a place to live, so by modern standards, we were doing very well.
Right? Maybe
It's
one meal
really-
a day and a roof, you're good, right?
Yeah, well, it's really hard to be poor now. It really is expensive to be alive in any, so it's very hard for artists that they can't starve in their garret because the garret, it costs $5 million in Manhattan or Brooklyn, whereas the garret, it costs a bomb, So it's hard to do that. But it was easy enough to do in Dublin at the time, which was much more, had that kind of communal feel, and nobody had work anyway in those days. So it was easier to hang out and be artistic.
And that has changed in Dublin much as it has changed in the States and in
Really
New York.
sadly, because although you try and rejuvenate the artistic heart of the city, because the art is the creativity is part of the kind of tourist draw and the commercial draw and everything. So they realise but they outprice the people who give them that kind of nice status. They don't really treasure them, I don't think, or the system doesn't treasure them.
So after this initial publication of your debut novel, you're sort of off and running, like you've published.
No, I think that whole decade was really anxious, and I try to explain to young people now. When you published a book back then, nothing happened.
Well, nothing much happens usually these days either. I mean, it depends who you are, I guess. But I mean, it's very hard to break through.
Well, yeah, but when I say nothing happens, it's like Wednesday, and you've published a book, and nobody asks you for an interview. I don't think that book was reviewed in Ireland. It was reviewed in the UK, which is in London, but it wasn't reviewed in Dublin. So you're just saying, oh yeah, I wrote a book and there it is, and it might be in a shop or it might be in all the shops. But you're not going to. I think I sold 1,000 copies or something in a year. I don't know. And there were no prizes. You weren't shortlisted for anything. There was nothing to be shortlisted for. There might be one prize, and they'd shortlist really, really strange books that you never hear of again. Anyway, nobody heard of The Wig My Father Wore again for a long time anyway.
But have subsequently come back to it after the successes you've had with subsequent books.
Maybe.
And, I know you've talked about this ad nauseum, but I do have to at least note the fact that your book, The Gathering, won the Booker Prize in 2007. I mention it just because it's such a big moment for an author to win one of the major prizes, in the sense that I think it elevates your visibility. Like, right? You must have brought you a lot of readers.
Hugely so. And actually, but when I say nobody ever kind of realised where you're... I did okay, and I did okay for the next few books, and I wasn't completely... It wasn't... some people said, oh, that came from nowhere, or you were discovered by the Booker. I actually was doing... It was getting better. I was getting more coverage. I don't mean to exaggerate. I even got an advance from one of my books.
Whoa!
It's like, whoa, okay. So
yeah.
it was starting to happen, and I also got rid of all the anxieties of my 30s, and in my 40s I had kids, so I didn't have time to be fretful, and I wrote quite effectively for, so I wrote The Gathering when they were quite small in 2004, when the kids were quite little, and I had nothing else to do. So, but it's really busy being the parent of small children. So to have the booker was like an extra job on all the jobs I had already. It was like a third job of work. It took an enormous amount of time. It was very alarming.
What you just said is very interesting to me. I will couple what I'm about to say with something that I think I read about you with respect to your reading habits. You were a voracious reader as a child. That reading habit followed you all the way into adulthood, but then you have 2 young children and suddenly you're not reading much at all. You're not reading much at all, at least not in the way that you previously were. So that's interesting that you get into this space where the input is low, but you have this huge backlog of all these books. Like, you were a really good reader.
Yeah.
And then the thing I want to pair that with is what you just said about not having time to be precious about the writing, and really only having very maybe small windows or very concentrated periods of time to write at all because you were so busy with being a mother. And that actually served the work well.
Well, when the babies were small, as soon as they started to sleep, you would start to type. I mean, it was like a starter's pistol. And then sometimes a baby will sleep for 3 hours straight. I mean, sometimes they might sleep all afternoon, and you get enormous amounts of work done.
Right.
Because you're going to be interrupted any second. And if you're not, you've got work done. Whereas in my 20s and 30s, I'd have anxiety, I'd have procrastination, I had little rituals, I'd kind of make my workspace really precious and right and clean and nice and scented maybe, and the whole thing.
Right.
And then I would, have an idea or not have an idea. It's all bullshit. It's just like it's in front of you. You have to work it. So I had no other option but to work. I was highly productive, but I didn't take in that much in those years.
So something you have said about winning the Booker Prize, you said, what happens is that the world changes very quickly, but you don't. The world suddenly looks at you with different eyes, but you're not different. That makes a lot of sense to me. Like, you're working, publishing these books, having some incremental success, and then suddenly you win this prize, and there's probably interview requests. There's a lot of readers, people showing up to your readings in larger numbers, and kind of seeing you in a more elevated way. And yet you're the same old writer in person you've always been. For sure,
with the same problems that you had before creatively, except with this extra light on the process. So it takes a while to gather in the darkness around yourself again, so you can huddle in there and do your writing thing. So but because it's a fantasy, isn't it? It's a kind of idealized thing. You win a prize, and it's like ding. It's like you're the girl with the prize.
I mean, it's lovely. It's a lovely thing to have happen, right? It's not something. I mean, it's great. You embrace it in a broad sense, but I get that you would have to sort of adjust to it, and like you say, gather in the darkness and get back to a place where you can sort of forget about it.
Yeah, it also disrupts some of your connections with people you've known a long time, because you're materially your life has changed apart from anything else, and so the unchangingness of other people's lives becomes really starkly apparent to them. So it's not always enjoyed by people around you, one way or the other.
Especially writer friends, like people, colleagues, or just people generally. No comment. It's very diplomatic of you. Well, we'll get now, just in the interest of time, to the new book. And I'm always interested in where books begin for people. And I think I read that this book began with a comment that someone made to you years ago, a man talking about leaving his sick wife.
Well,
is that the seedling for this book, or is it something else?
let's not think in terms of one starting moment, okay? Because a book starts going when you have two ideas, at
Oh,
least. So when you have a problem, and a problem has a problem has two sides to it. So, but yes, many years ago, I mean, I met this writer. He had custody issues. He was organising something on the phone. He said, "Sorry, yeah, no, we split up. My wife got sick, and we split up." And I thought, "Oh dear." And later, I was wondering, did he mean that his wife went mad and dumped him? Was that, it's a mental illness? And then I realised, no, that man didn't like his wife being sick, and he walked out and left her with a young child, and now it's all very fraught. So that was kind of interesting, because the response of some of the men, the kind of men in relationships with women, you talk to girlfriends, and they talk about how their partners are when they get sick, and it can be quite an odd conversation, because they really don't like it, and they don't like it and they can go kind of peculiar.
yeah, that is true, right? I mean,
I
I'm
think it
thinking,
is true.
if I'm being honest, I have to cop to this. Like, if my wife gets sick, I'm like, oh shit! Like, everything gets destabilized. I'm trying.
Yeah,
It's hard. It's hard. It's hard in a family, especially with young children.
sure.
But I need to be a better like caregiver. I mean,
Well, I don't know.
some of
It's
it's just
not.
practical, just practical time pressure kind of stuff. But it stinks when somebody's sick.
It does practically, but what you're also maybe thinking about is how you forget things when there's. So I might say, "Oh, I have to go for a test." My husband, who's great, will forget that I have to, and he go, "Oh yeah, that. Ooh, yeah, I forgot.
Right.
Oh no, I have something else on. I can't bring you for that." It's like, "Oh, I told you." So what's going on is it is quite a fugitive. It's quite. Anyway, in my book, Phil, who leaves his wife when she's sick, you can see that it's not a callous, cruel assessment of the relationship. He's not weighing the relationship and saying there's nothing here for me. He's anguished by it. He's agitated. It renders him chaotic, and he doesn't know what to do. His wife is sick. His wife is seriously sick. This is really he can't compass it. He doesn't know what's going on, and so he doesn't abandon them. He doesn't kind of sign off. He kind of chaotically leaves. Although that's not how it's experienced in the book by one of the daughters, who thinks that he walked out on a particular day.
Okay, so I wanna elaborate on Phil, but before we get any further, I just want to make sure I'm clear. You said that books begin with two things, like working in opposition to one another. You sort of have a problem. So there is the one thing, which is this notion of a man leaving his sick wife, and then what's the other thing?
Um, well, the other thing didn't arrive. Well, okay, it did arrive. Okay, it did. I don't want to be too schematic, but there was the poetry.
Okay, which brings us to Phil, and forgive me if I'm screwing up this pronunciation. Phil McDermott.
Yep.
Okay, Phil McDermott is kind of the patriarch of this novel, of this family, and he is known as, and I'm quoting here, the finest love poet of his generation. He's a great Irish poet, kind of like a grand old man of letters in
Well,
the old,
he's grand enough.
grand enough, like kind of there's something old school
Yeah.
about the way that you characterize him, and it's just a great character because he's kind of villainous, but you're not painting in black and white here. There's a big gray area in the way that you draw characters, which is lovely. And the relationships are complicated. Obviously, the relationship with his wife, does not survive her illness, her very serious illness.
Except it does. They never stop loving each other as they keep declaring.
Yeah, I mean,
Really
yeah, but
weirdly.
it's complicated
Yeah.
is the thing, But you consistently over the course of your career have written about family. You're so good at writing about family relationships, and I just have to say too that there is something effortless seeming about the way that you write. It just feels like someone's just talking to me. Yeah, and you're like, haha, took me years. But I don't know, like it's just, there's a great music to your writing, just wonderful. And there's great nuance in all of these characters. You have, just so for people listening who have not had a chance to read yet, you have Phil, who is this poet, his wife Terry, who winds up getting breast cancer. He leaves her for what they call the American wife. Her name is Connie. She plays sort of like a peripheral role in the novel.
Yeah, there's a little kind of chaos between, there's a woman called Bunty and there's another woman in Greece. So there are a couple of affairs before he settles with Connie in America. Yeah.
Right. So then, so Phil and Terry have 2 daughters. There's Carmel and Imelda. Is that right? Mm-hmm. And then Carmel, who is a more central character in the book than her sister, has a daughter named Nell. So this is a generational story. Nell is a key figure in the book. And, you know, as you were talking earlier about your university experiences at Trinity in this theater program, I could see like little bits, like little small brushstrokes maybe in Nell from those days that you were maybe drawing on. Is that right? Like the friend group? There's something sort of similar in the way that you characterize.
Yeah, I mean, people ask, how can you write about a young person? The better question is, how can you write an old person? Because you haven't been old yet. So no one's surprised if you write someone who's old. But I have been asked, how can you write somebody who's in their 20s? And I mean, I have been in my 20s. I mean, that's, it's like, and some of Nell's voice or sort of the impulse in the writing is close to the early short stories that I wrote. So there's a kind of modernist sensibility at play. So Nell is kind of, and it goes back to The Week My Father Wore, which is set in TV. So she's very online and she's very busy with lots of apps and things like, you know, so there's quite a modernist thing. She's also in a poor relationship, and that breaks down the prose a little, fragments it a bit.
With Phelim. Phelim is his name?
Phelim.
Man, that is brutal. Not a good guy. I mean, you know, again, he's not the devil, but he's got some issues. You get the feeling
that he has a different life in which he's a better person. But this is the room, and this is the relationship. Sorry, this is the place where he's not a good person.
Right.
And he has a moment where he says, "What are we doing?" And she looks at him thinking, "What? Who are you?
Yeah.
Why are you asking me this question?" So they do kind of create each other, or they create that space themselves as well. I mean, Nell, I'm really reluctant to use the word complicit, but it's seen very much through Nell's eyes, this very bad relationship, which she's very interested in and not interested in. It's quite binary what happens by the end. Either it works completely for her, it's very thrilling and interesting, or it doesn't work and it's just really shoddy and awful.
Well, here again, I love the complexity of the way that you draw this. Like, it's not just like, oh, he's awful to me and he's the bad guy and I'm the good girl. Like you say, she's into it at times, and even in ways that are like she's sometimes into the way that he mistreats her. You know what I'm saying? It's complicated, is the point.
Totally. Well, I think that totally.
So
he is into it. Yes.
Yeah.
So that is, kind of alarming and interesting to me. So that was one of the things that I was quite keen to explore, but I found it for quite a reach and very kind of emotionally draining to kind of, it's not really a space that I would, it was interesting. Yeah.
Well, and it's believably drawn. I mean, I know you've been in your 20s, so you have those experiences, but there are big differences, I find anyway, between me and like younger generations. And
I don't know if I have those experiences, so just to clarify.
No, but I just mean like the way that you draw a person in their 20s in like contemporary life is impressive, just because I had no doubt. Like, it was right there. It felt very real and vital.
I mean, there are things that I love doing. She talks about her friends, Lily this and Maya that, and we never see the friends. And that's to me, that's just a woman of 22 as she is there. That's true to how you talk. You're always talking about your friends.
I'm sure you're probably learning from your children too, by observing them in terms of the way that young people interact and
Some of the
don't.
online communications,
Yeah.
some of the kind of stupid, funny stuff in the texting, that kind of, yeah, I take that from them, yeah.
Okay. So we then, I then want to talk to you about like thematic concerns in this book, which I think you have described as like this is a book about inheritance. It's about of both trauma and wonder. So with this Phil character in mind, he is Nell's grandfather, and he is a figure who kind of looms large in her imagination. I think there's some connectivity between the two of them in terms of their artistic temperament. Mm-hmm. Like Nell feels very much like she's got some of that artistic brilliance in her that she, I'm sure, conceives of as being drawn from her grandfather, who was not super present in her life in the physical sense, but who has this kind of mythic quality to him. The way
He
that
left these poems.
Right.
She can read. She reads his poetry, so he's present, or that version of him is very available to her.
And she says in the book, when things were bad, I would curl up with Phil and sweeten the hurt. Mm-hmm. And there's something lovely about that. And that would be that's got to be, I guess I'll never know. But, you write a bunch of books, leave behind this sort of like stack of whatever it is, literature, and then generations from now. I wish I had my great-great-grandfather's novels to read. That would be interesting to me. Who wouldn't like that, especially if you feel a sense of connection to it. That is
They would probably be more interesting to you than your parents' novels, which would just be utterly boring and like, oh my God, so dated.
Yeah, right. But somebody who you never met, or who had some real generational distance from you, you definitely feel that in Nell. And it's a way, I think, of her working towards some kind of self-understanding, the way that we make sense of ourselves through our parents and through our ancestors, and sort of piecing it together. But it's a lovely portrait of multiple generations of a family, and I'm so impressed with how like fluid it seems, the way that I remained oriented throughout the text without ever feeling lost, despite the fact that you're jumping from narrator to narrator, you're switching POV, you're doing a lot of things that I think on the surface might be quote unquote like inadvisable, like, people could get lost, but I didn't. And
good.
I'd love to hear you talk about those kinds of choices, working through the story, building a sense of cohesiveness, even though you're shifting POV and narrator, like the creative challenge of that.
So, yes, I think that book would have been hard to write if I'd planned to write it. But because I was following the way it grew, I was just shepherding it somehow. I was just herding it through from page 1 to page 250. So it has an improvisatory and spontaneous kind of feel in the early writing, and then at some moment you realise what the book requires, which happens. It's just how I work on every book. And then you have to structure it. So the first really big shift is because Nell is very immediate and her problem is very immediate. So that should more or less interest the reader or not. They will know fairly early on whether they're going to stay with this book. And then we have a kind of shift to her mother's point of view, which is much more old school, much more, it's past tense, and it's third person, close third person, third person narrative. It's less immediate and it's more kind of normal by some standards. I actually found Carmel, the mother, the hardest to write because Carmel's so pragmatic and everyone tells her she has no imagination. That's what happened to her. She locked down, she toughened up, she got through. She closed off her way of thinking very young, so that she's just, but actually it's quite like a lot of ordinary naturalism, where you're not getting much by way of the lyrical or the metaphorical or the imaginative. So it's just it's a very plain text for me, So I suppose the challenge would be to go in at a moment where you're in media res, you're in mid flow, so you're going to be interested enough again pretty early on. So it's just a series of narrative hooks of the more basic kind, I suppose. But because the discourses, the way Nell talks and the way Carmel thinks are so different, that's the thing you have to try to make people not see until later when it makes more sense.
Well, and you just touched on this, but another thing that this book draws very well is this generational difference between women and the circumstances of their lives.
Yeah.
I believe you said, you refer to it as like women switching from Marthas to Marys from generation to generation.
Yes.
Some get to tend and others to believe.
So Nell is a believer. She's passionate. She's going to go out and she's going to make the same kind of mistakes Phil did. I mean, somebody said, is Phelim like the bad guy? She is Phil the bad guy, and Phelim, she repeats that mistake. But actually, she is that mistake. She embodies the luxury of making mistakes. So that freedom to be able to go out and be stupid and do the wrong thing and figure it out is something that she claims for herself. And Carmel would never claim that for herself. Carmel keeps it all going, and would have no interest in making mistakes whatsoever.
Well, speaking of making mistakes, something that I noted about your writing is how good you are at writing about sex.
Okay.
And
is that a mistake?
No. I'm speaking of like Nell's relationship mistakes. That's what I meant. But this is something that cuts against, I think, what might be characterized as like traditional Irish conservative ideas about what should be on the page. I know things have obviously changed, but you're a part of that change. Like this is part of the human experience, and you kind of go right at it. And not everybody's able to write about it well. And yet it's such an elemental part of our existence. And I always appreciate it when someone is sort of unflinching about it on the page.
Well, the first question I ask of books that don't have either jokes or sex in them is that where did it go? I mean, what are these people doing with their days and evenings and all the rest of it? It's not those characters. Why are we shutting those doors one way or the other? There are antecedents in the Irish tradition. A writer called John McGahern wrote really, really sad, horrible sex, basically. It was really in a very repressed and claustrophobic culture. And he was banned way back in the day and lost his job and all kinds of things. They're kind of glancing references, but they exist. And then there's Joyce, who wrote the opposite, who was kind of glorious, kind of libidinous rush of, Molly Bloom or whatever, where he never wrote about sex proper. Ulysses is a book where everybody thinks about everything and does basically everything except have sex, which happens off. He's quite wonderful and a bit weird choice in some ways. So it does exist, and I think part of it was in a sort of feminist way, that when you grow up in a repressive culture, that you're always sexualized. No matter what you do and what you write, it's going to be a woman writing. You're going to be gendered every time you walk out the literary door, basically. So that it's not just writing, simple writing, it's female writing or whatever. And that's embodied writing, because how there was in those days no other way to be female, right? Except in an embodied sort of way. So Edna O'Brien was also considered outrageous in her time. So it's an honourable tradition, I suppose. It's kind of, I do, on the family WhatsApp, I do say, nobody has to read this book, please.
It's entirely optional, right?
Yeah, and my siblings say, I wouldn't understand it anyway, said my sisters.
But it's like there's a courage that I think good writers must have. You have to be willing, whether it's writing about sex or writing about other, delicate subject matter.
Money is a great subject. There's lots of, and there's a lot of violence in this book, small violence in this book, which was extremely difficult to write. And I knew also at the time that this was also taboo, these kind of small assaults in the book.
Well, I feel like your life and career have tracked, when you think about, like, I'm not like the expert on Irish cultural history, but there have been some pretty seismic shifts in Ireland over the course of your lifetime. And I think your work reflects that, and maybe like work like yours has helped to occasion some of these shifts, you know?
I just, I'm such a believer in change. I mean, and the past is not a nostalgic place for me, because I mean, the drive for change in my 30 years of writing has been really part of the push that gets me to the page, for sure. And it's a kind of truth telling that you say, actually, this is the reality of people's lives. I mean, that might be part of the impulse to sit down at the desk, but there is a kind of fierceness available to you when you say, "Oh, I need to tell it the way it is. All this bullshit now, you know."
Yeah, I relate to that so much. I was raised, Catholic, which I don't think that's necessarily central to what I'm talking about, but it's certainly a part of it. And I think maybe this is something that a lot of writers share, and a lot of the reason why the act of writing is attractive to us is this idea that, like, whatever we're seeing in our day-to-day lives, whatever is kind of appearing at surface level with people, isn't the full story.
Sure.
Or there's something artificial about it, or something hidden about what's actually going on. And it's such a great relief to sit down and to try to put it down in the way that you actually believe it to be happening.
But it's not necessarily a destructive act or a paranoid act. It can draw things together, even as, it can be a resolution rather than a kind of exposure, It's not just exposing things for the sake of it.
So a question that is related, I'd like to sort of segue from writing about sex and taboo and gender to writing about plot might not seem, or to talking about plot might not seem like a connected issue, but it is in the way that you conceive of it. And I find this very interesting. You have said about your own work, I do story as opposed to plot. And you have also said that there's something gendered possibly about this difference between story and plot, where men are more likely to want to make a plot which is more machine-like, to kind of construct a machine, out of their novel or whatever, whereas a story is something that's more concerned with insight, as opposed to a plot which is more about effect. That's interesting to me. I've never quite heard it said that way. Do you agree with yourself, first of all?
Do I agree with myself? It's a very good way of putting it. Do I still agree with myself?
Yeah.
I think, actually, even when I was in University of East Anglia and everybody was obsessed by plot, and I don't have a plot, and what do I do with my plot, and and I didn't quite twig what was going on. I didn't quite understand it. And I may be talking about the thrillers used to be more a male form, and those genderings don't really hold true anymore, perhaps. So yeah, excitement of one kind, and film has a lot to do with that. You need something that you could, if you're going to turn it into a movie, has excitement, obstacles, and resolutions, and all the rest of it. So I'm alert to this because those structures, those narrative structures, go back to Shakespeare. They go back to the Greeks. They're very intuitive for us. It's very hard to get away from the 3-act structure. So when I'm worried about that, and I will look at that graph of the 3-act structure. I keep it on my computer and I look at it and I wonder, am I anywhere near it? But
retroactively you're doing this. You're sort of writing, letting yourself create, and then maybe in the edit applying some.
Well, yeah, in the edit, but also you are looking for those moments. It is an emotional arc, so I'll do the emotional arc without the burning buildings and the guns and all the other kind of things that might go with a very plotty plot.
Okay, but I got to say, like, this, this way of characterizing it crystallized, like, how I was feeling as I was reading your book, story versus plot. Like, the other thing that I would add is that, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, is that there's a great sense of someone talking to me. Like
Right.
these are beautiful lines, and I know from experience that these are crafted sentences that are giving this effect. It's not like you just talked into your phone and dictated the novel, or maybe you did, but
Yeah.
but it has the energy of the spoken. So when you characterize what you do as story, that makes it make sense to me. It's like, yeah, I really feel like someone was telling me a great story, but yet it didn't have, like you say, the guns and the bombs and the explosions and all of the kind of conventions of what we think of traditionally as plot, particularly in the context of film and television, where you're hitting beats and it's sort of playing on these ways that we're conditioned to experience story. And it was lovely in that way because it felt really human. There was something unexpected about it. It was propulsive. It was every bit to me, even if not more so, propulsive in the way that maybe a more conventionally plotted book would be. And I'm like, wow, there's something. I have to believe that the writing process is a place where you really allow yourself to be free, and that there is something deeply intuitive about the way that you work through one of your stories.
Yes.
As opposed to preconceived, where you're outlining. I think you kind of said this earlier. You're not doing that. You're sort of showing up and working your way through. And I took away from it as a writer. I got to say, this doesn't always happen to me when I read a book, but when I finished your book, I had a great writing day.
Oh, good.
It like opened me up. I was like, oh yeah,
Oh,
like
good.
it freed me up. So thank
Yeah.
you. It had it had kind of like a freeing effect in the sense that I don't know. I could feel the way that you maybe give yourself a wonderful creative permission when you are sitting down to write. Like you seem to have a freedom that I like and want more of.
Good. Yeah. I mean, you can become a bit schematic. So you might, some writers need their ducks in a row. They need to know where they're going before they go there. I like taking a line for a walk, just seeing, or a more organic kind of way of growing the characters and then seeing what they need or seeing what that implies. And I like those stories that you hear and you don't quite know why you like them or what they mean. So I like those ones.
Well, they're very dimensional. These people feel so fully realized and real. And, we talked at the top about the origins, of kind of having this notion of a man leaving his sick wife, and you then build out from there. Like I'm curious to know, because you work sort of intuitively, how long it took before you had the generations sort of sorted out in this book. You know what I'm saying? And how long did it
Yeah.
take you to realize that this was Nell's story centrally? It's also, I mean, the other characters also have quite a lot to say, but I really do feel like this is a Nell novel.
See, I don't know how long it took because it's like a long haul flight. I never question how many hours are left. So I don't know at what stage, but maybe about a year in. Sometimes when I'm writing a book, I'll have the previous generation and I'll dump them out of the book. Like I dumped the grandparents out of a book called The Green Road. I dumped a lot of history out of that. So I'm always, as I'm building, I'll build the back history for the characters, which in a small place like Ireland is really entirely possible because people don't move and things happen in locations that you can access, and you can know quite a lot about your characters if you go deep into the history. But anyway, so I was in the generational thing. So Carmel is this tough-minded woman, very very lockdown, okay? Very lockdown, where we just couldn't imagine things because imagining things was a mistake, okay? That was a big mistake during COVID, was to think too much. You just had to get on with it. And then there was the poetry. So the poetry was on my daily walks. I would go up Killiney Hill, a local park, and see the spring, the spring. That spring of 2020 was incredibly moving. And I was hyper fixated and slightly ecstatic in this response to nature. I understood what nature poetry could be about somehow. And that was the other side of Phil. So Carmel was there for a long time, and I was trying to write Phil's poems, which also appear in the book, for a long time. And those were the two poles of romance and anti-romance, you might say. Then I decided what would happen if Carmel wasn't really going anywhere. I thought maybe if she got pregnant, It's my favourite thing. I got a character pregnant. It takes a lot of planning. It's like, how would that happen? Easily, whatever. And as soon as Nell came out, I had, which she, as soon as she was born, she had that quality which children do when they're born, of being entirely herself. So that the Nellness of Nell, the kind of completeness of her personality from the get-go, I realised that this character is going to be what she is. She's incontrovertible. She has this kind of imperative. She's always going to be herself. So her first words, Carmel says, might as well have been Asher fuck it. She's a child. She's absolutely heedless and fantastic. And so that was that kind of energy with this quite stolid maternal figure. And I thought, okay, here we go. Here is now. So the book came with Nell.
Yeah, the two things working in opposition,
Absolutely.
This great kind of like tension, like loving tension, but like just different, two different characters entirely.
With a problem, which is that they do love each other entirely, as Nell says, but they can't get along.
Yeah, right. Which, and it's very insightful, this book is, in terms of the way that family dynamics work. This is something you're sort of known for. And it's making me wonder, because you just touched on this, about Ireland and how people kind of stay rooted oftentimes there to a place in ways that maybe in other countries it's not quite so prevalent. And so, you can really get to know a place. You can really get to know people. You can really get to know your family because people are living in relatively close proximity, and it's a small country, like in terms of landmass. So maybe that has helped to inform this part of your writing. It's part of why you're so good at drawing out these characters in the way that they operate relationally.
Well, they leave and come back. I mean, in the Green Road, which I just mentioned, the sons in particular go away and come back for Christmas. And the thing about Ireland is you don't have the option of coming back for Christmas or not. Nobody stays away. It's just not possible.
Right. Got to come home.
Got to come home. That's the only, and because of the history of emigration, home gets set in this kind of nostalgic aspect, that it's going to be the same.
Well, that's how Phil is, right? He's like, what does he say? Like, you never can leave. Or he's in the States, in that part of his life after the marriage ends, and he's got the new American wife. And there's this interview that he does. It feels sort of Charlie Rose-ish almost. Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with Charlie Rose. But,
a little bit.
Yeah, that used to be the place for like the highbrow interview that I think was coveted by a lot of cultural figures. And it had that sort of vibe. And he's talking about how he never left Ireland, even though he's lived in the States,
It's always with you, he says.
Yeah, it's always with you.
I never left. So his daughter is looking at this, going, oh, okay. you never left. Isn't that nice?
Yeah, isn't that nice? Have you ever left? I guess you went to Canada. Have you? Did you ever? I really
tried to leave. I really have tried to leave. I mean, there are times you just say, I have to get out of this place. It's just, but actually, it's really good. I mean, I'm glad I stayed.
It's lovely.
It is. It's a nice place, but a really good place to write from and to. But in my 20s, I would have lived anywhere. I would have packed a bag, not even a large bag, and I would have gone anywhere. So. I was in Canada for those 2 years. I was in Norwich in England for the year of the MA. I did 6 months in New York at one stage, but I was really over and back home, so that wasn't really New York,
Mm-hmm.
It was transient.
I want to go. I was supposed to go to Ireland with my wife, and then her father got very ill, so we had to cancel our trip. And so I have not yet gotten to go, and I would love to go. And I have this fantasy of being able to really spend time in Ireland and Scotland and then the northern part of England, which I have not yet visited.
Yeah.
I want to get out into the country a little bit. I mean, I want to see Dublin, but I want to see those cliffs and those green hills.
Yeah.
It's so pretty.
I just spent a week walking down in County Cork and Kerry, and pre-publication to kind of crack the anxiety of I had to do something really difficult.
Yeah.
Because to brace for impact of publication. It's just awful. So I went for long walks with my husband down hiking down in Beara. Actually, I'm too old for hiking. It's just terrible. It's really hard. We did hours and hours, but it's astonishing. It is so beautiful.
I read too that you were into Ashtanga. I was reading. I mean, this is some past interview.
God Almighty, yeah.
Still, the question that arose for me, because I've done some of that, is that did it survive the pandemic? Because it got hard.
No, I mean, I see my lovely teacher now and then, and I'm saying, yeah, I'm going to go. I'll be back. No, I mean, I would, if I was doing a bit of yoga, which I do occasionally, it would be that series, the primary series. But it's you're always getting back to it. I mean, when you say receding, isn't it? It's always just nearly there.
It feels that way, but I feel like when you talk about breaking the tension of like pre-publication, I've always found that exercise, like doing yoga or something, just is a nice way to sort of like.
I know if you can get out of the chair and away from the screen, if you can break that,
Right.
Yeah. So we did a bit of cycling as well.
And now here you are. You're just launched into your publicity cycle.
I know.
I hope I'm catching you early. You seem like
It's just started. It started yesterday. I went down to Galway and back last night, and this is kind of day one. I'm so delighted to be in it. It's like getting into a cold sea. It's great.
Okay.
It's fun.
Well, good. But I'm very pleased to be catching you early because, in my experience, it's better to get an author at the beginning of their tour than at the end.
Yeah. Do they get cranky?
Well, I think they've said the same thing. How many different ways can you give an interview about a book? So you start to get maybe some of the things they've repeated. And I don't know. It's just nice to catch people when they're just launching.
Sure. I was never very good at doing rote, I mean, I was never good at that, at learning off what I should be saying. And the other thing is, American authors are so competent and professional. They can tell you what their book is about, and I want to say, I don't know what it's about. I have no idea what it's about. Please tell me.
It's the worst question to ask an author, I think. What's your book about? It's a natural question, but it's like, maybe as a self-defense mechanism, you just, you land on the elevator pitch or some kind of shorthand, but it's not a question I like either.
And also you make it up after the fact. You write the book and then you invent what it's about.
If you're the kind of writer that you are, and I think maybe I lean more this way as well, like somebody who's not writing out a detailed outline, somebody who's intuiting their way through it. Before I let you go, I want to ask you a bit more about the writing practice, that you maintain or have had to maintain over the years to get all these books done. As I said earlier, there does feel like there's just like a lot of creative freedom. There's a sense of play in the language. And I guess that, I think you would probably say that's the case. You also have to couple that with some discipline. Like you do have to show up regularly. Can you talk just a little bit about how you get the work done?
Well, the thing about it being creative or, that there's some kind of pleasure in the process, I mean, that's absolutely vital. You can't spend 30 years doing a boring fucking sloggy job, okay? It's terrible. Why be a writer if it's a slog? So I wouldn't say I am clearly not disciplined in any way, in any other kind of part of my life. I do water my potted plants. That's a discipline.
They look healthy. I'm seeing them right now.
They're looking good, and they grow, and that's all very exciting. But one of the tricks is I don't do anything else. I don't do anything else. So it's not really a discipline. So if you say, what time of day do I write? I'd write any time, all the time. I like writing. I make it enjoyable.
How do you make it enjoyable for yourself?
By not over planning and failing. By not going in there and failing every day is one way of by being explorative rather than reaching for something that pre-exists.
And that would be because you say by not failing every day, meaning like not giving yourself some out of reach goal that's going to make you feel bad about the process.
Yeah, I actually have clearly changed my mind, because I used to think that writing was all about creative shortfall. You have this grand, beautiful idea, and the book is just the book, always. But that's not how I've begun to feel in the last few books. I feel that I'm just kind of trying something out.
So does this mean that your first drafts are really messy and that you do a lot of revising and fixing up?
I don't do a first draft. So by the time I put the last full stop on, that's my 125,000th draft, and I'm done.
Yeah, that's how I am too. This is
Okay.
so you're editing as you go,
Yeah, so I reach the end point.
and you're
And
done.
of course, then you have to, deal with the publication and whatever. You have to go back and fix all kinds of stuff. But when but I arrive at the end point after many, many, many drafts along the way.
So when you sit down for a session of work, are you rereading most of what you've already done each day? Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, I mean, it's like, what do you do? So yeah, you're rewriting mostly, and it's certainly you rewrite as a way of tricking yourself into writing further forward.
yeah,
Yeah.
So,
So
yeah.
you're rewriting, and then suddenly you've got some more. I mean, I think I read somewhere that Don DeLillo used to write a paragraph and wind the typewriter up so that he didn't see the paragraph the next day, and then he'd write a new one. And that's kind of a nightmare. I mean, it's amazing. It takes like, oh my God, a heart of stone. Not a heart of stone. It takes tough-mindedness to be able to do that.
Just so that he wouldn't get hung up on the previous day's work.
Yeah. So as a way of proceeding. But again, it's like a long-haul flight. Do not think about the destination, and you won't get agitated by not being there yet.
And you say you don't do anything else. So does this mean you write most days?
Yeah. And I write at the weekends. And, I mean, it is bad news all around, actually, because I just write all the time.
But you love it.
I do like it, yeah.
And what about your reading habits? I know that now that your kids have grown, you probably have more time to read, and that's always that's part of I think that's part of it. You have to be well fed in order to be able to produce.
Sure.
So
Yeah, I'm kind of bound a little bit by current work because it's so, it's kind of lively here, and so it's hard for me to go back into work that is 50, 60 years old, because there's always somebody posting something through your door. Please read this.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little bit. The major revolution in my reading life has been a garden chair.
getting outside.
Yeah, with a book.
No phone.
Beautiful. No phone.
Yeah.
Maybe a phone.
Here's what I find. I mean, I can get distracted and just like pick up the phone and like check social media. But I find that if I'm reading, let's say I'm reading your novel and you start referencing someplace in Ireland that just sounds lovely. Suddenly, like I'm on, what was it called? Tullamore?
Tullamore,
and then there's like Tullamore Dew, and I'm like, oh, there's whiskey. I did this. I'll start to like look for pictures because I want to get a frame of reference. And then all of a sudden, like 10 minutes
Actually, I
have
do
gone
that
by.
when I'm writing. I'm very happy for you to do that. I don't mind. I mean, there is a distinction for me between books that don't let you escape from them and books that make you look up and think.
Yeah.
So I don't mind a book that makes me look up and think. And these days it's look up and click away sometimes. I don't really mind that.
Yeah, I mean, looking at some lovely pictures and Tullamore Dew. That's apparently, according to Google, it's a very famous whiskey, from that place. But it's a lovely book. It's just masterfully done, and I'm so grateful to you as you set out on this very busy tour. I know you have a flight to catch. That you were willing to give me some of your time, and just really appreciate it, and I wish you well.
Thank you. It's lovely being talking. I mean, it's really been lovely. Yeah. That's how you get fresh stuff from writers. You ask them nice questions.
Right.